So great, welcome everybody. It's really delightful to have so many of you online and joining us for this time with Joe Hoyle, and welcome to Accounting Cafe. Accounting Cafe started up during lockdown, and it's one of those things that happened almost by accident. It's become a worldwide community of accounting educators who come together really to see if they can share excellent teaching practice. It's run entirely by its members. We have no grants, there's no sponsorship, we have no institutional affiliations. So under our own steam, we publish articles and resources, courses, seminars, workshops, and I think most importantly, we provide a place for discussion and debate. And as it stands now, we have more than 1,000 members worldwide. And you're all very welcome. If you're not already, you're very welcome to join the community. You just sign up on the homepage of our website. It's absolutely free. So please do join the community. And if you're able, also consider how you might contribute to the community. So if you have an article or you'd like to make a talk, as Joe is doing, or you have a particular practice you'd like to share, then please do consider writing an article for us or getting in touch and saying how you might like to share that. Also, sign up to our newsletter so you get notice of our future events. Spread the word, tell your colleagues, friends, and networks about Accounting Cafe and what it is we're trying to do. Nominate yourself as a speaker or suggest somebody as a speaker. And follow us on LinkedIn. So that's enough about Accounting Cafe. As I said, there'll be time towards the end if you want to hang on and find out more about some of the programs that we're offering. But I know what you've come for. You've come for Joe Hoyle. So let's talk about Joe. Those of you who don't know Joe, you're in for a real treat. Well, those of you who do know are also in for a real treat. We're all in for a treat because Joe is with us. Joe Hoyle is Associate Professor and Accounting Teaching Fellow at University of Richmond. And he's going to share with us this afternoon the wisdom he's acquired over more than half a century of accounting education. Joe believes, as we do at Accounting Cafe, he believes strongly that colleges and universities should share freely as much educational material as they can, because he believes the world desperately needs more high quality education, not just in accounting, but across the disciplines. He's also spent the last weeks, months, years, perhaps his whole life working on a book. And the book is called Transformative Education. And it's free because he believes that should be the goal of every course we offer. And he wants everybody to sign up to that goal of transforming education. His book isn't about teaching accounting. It's about helping you become the best college teacher you can be, no matter what the subject. And I will, while Joe is talking, I will put a link in the chat so you can download a free copy of Joe's book. He has very little to say about FASB or IFRS or sustainability accounting. You may be relieved to know. But he does draw deeply on the works of Bruce Springsteen and Mark Rothko, Tom Hanks, Nelson Mandela, Raphael, and Miss Piggy. I'm not sure how many of those characters Joe's going to be squeezing into his chat this afternoon, but I hope, like me, you're very eager to hear 8 things that Joe has learned to create transformative education. Thanks so much for joining us today, Joe.
Let me start off by saying that it is truly a delight to have the chance to sit here in Richmond, Virginia, and talk with educators, in Europe and in the United States and possibly Australia or every place else. Just think about this. We are all educators. We all want to become better teachers. We're sitting here 10,000 miles, 5,000 miles from each other, and we're going to spend the next 45 minutes to 90 minutes or something talking about education. And I just think that's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And so let me start off by saying how very pleased I am that Toby invited me to do this. I take this as just a great honor and a great pleasure. And I appreciate so much those of you who are here today. at least for me, this is just spectacular. I can't think of anything I'd rather do than just talk with people who are interested in education. So let's get started. And what I want to do to get started basically is, let me give you a couple of disclaimers, and these are kind of minor disclaimers, but they may help you as you're hearing what I have to say. And Toby's already mentioned a couple of these. The first thing I want everybody to understand is that I'm going to talk about teaching as a general topic. I know that most of you, maybe all of you on here, are accounting teachers, and I could certainly tell you everything you want to know about lease accounting and probably bore you to death. I could talk about FASB. I can talk about IFRS. I can talk about deferred income taxes. But if you want to become a better teacher, my belief is that you have to begin by thinking about education as a general topic. And then once you understand education or learning or the learning process as a general topic, then you can build on it by adding accounting. You can't start by saying, I'm going to be an accounting teacher. You have to first start off by saying, I'm going to be a teacher, and then build the accounting on top of that. So if you came to hear me talk about deferred income taxes, two suggestions. One, send me an email. My email address is jhoyle@richmond.edu, and I'll tell you about deferred income taxes. Or suggest to Toby that he invites me back to talk about accounting and not teaching. And I'm always seeking to come back. So that's one possibility. So that's a disclaimer. Secondly, I imagine all of you teach someplace. My situation is my situation. I have about 50 students a semester. I teach relatively small classes. I teach upper level accounting classes. I understand that you'll have a different situation. You may have larger classes. You may have smaller classes. You may have smarter students. You may not have smarter students. So I recognize that, or you should recognize that when I talk about teaching, I'm always talking about my situation. And what I hope is that you'll be able to take what I say and translate it to your situation, because you face different issues than I face. But I believe that you can take some of the things I have to say and you can translate it into what you face on a day-to-day basis. So the third thing is, I can give you 8 suggestions. Heck, I can give you 1,000 suggestions. I have thought nothing about very little besides education over the last 53 years. I have plenty of suggestions. Whenever I give talks, and I give quite a number of talks, whenever I give talks, people seem to believe that they need to take everything I say and do it. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What I hope you do is you listen to these 8 things I'm going to tell you, and that you pick 1 or 2 or 3 that seem to apply to you today and focus your attention on that. I think you're much better off to leave this presentation in an hour or so with 1 or 2 things that you want to focus on, rather than saying, Joe gave me 27 ideas. Tomorrow, I'm going to use all 27 of those ideas. That won't work. People just don't do it that way. Find 1 or 2 things and say, that's what I'm going to focus on for the next month or 2. The fourth thing, I'm just giving you disclaimers before I even start. The fourth thing is, I'm not trying here to get you to be a clone of my teaching. I have a very unusual teaching style. There's in no way an attempt here to get you to teach like I teach. I think that's a waste of time. What I want is for you to be a better version of you. You teach in some particular manner, whether you're teaching accounting or philosophy or history or whatever you're teaching, you teach in a particular way. I want you to become a better teacher at being what you do. And I think if you listen to what I have to say and you take 1 or 2 of these ideas and focus on it, that you can become a better teacher, not in 10 years, but tomorrow. I think you can start becoming a better teacher when you walk into the class the very next time that you walk in. And I'm trying to keep up with my notes here while I do this. I'll make one more general comment and then I'll go to work. I think one thing that you need to recognize is that you'll never, ever be better than your ambition. I don't know anybody who is better than their ambition. So when you start thinking about becoming a better teacher, one of the things that I would highly recommend is that you think about how ambitious you are about being a better teacher. Do you really, really want to be a better teacher? Because I always tell people, to get to my campus, I have to cross the river, the James River, to get to our campus. So every day for decades, I have crossed the river to get to my campus. There has not been a single day that I've crossed that river that I didn't want to be the best teacher in my building. There's not been a day, I guarantee you, that I crossed that river that I didn't want to be the best teacher at my university. Heck, there's not been a day that I crossed that river that I didn't want to be the best teacher in the world, because I'm just an ambitious person when it comes to teaching. And I think that, I think one of the things we should start with is, do you really want to be a better teacher? Because if you want to be a better teacher, then you can become a better teacher. But heck, if you don't want to be a better teacher, then close this down and go do something else with your time. You'll never teach better than your ambition. Okay, so Tubby mentioned I wrote Transformative Education. It's a 75,000 word book. And if you've never written a 75,000 word book, that's a lot of work. So over the summer, 7 days a week, I got up at 5 a.m. and I wrote the entire day. I chained myself practically to my computer and I typed till I was exhausted. And I'd get up the next day and do it 7 days a week. Now, the question is, why in the heck would I do that? Plus, as Tubby mentioned, I'm giving the book away. Why would I do that? Well, I'm going to give you 2 reasons why I did that. Because I think if you're going to listen to me and hear my talk, then you need to know why in the world I did this. Well, I made a video for Accounting Cafe, and I quoted Nelson Mandela. And this is a quote that I basically think is just absolutely true. Nelson Mandela says, education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. And I believe that sincerely. The world has a lot of problems. I don't think I have to tell any of you that. And if the world and its problems, you could just pick the top 20 if you want. If the world is going to solve its problems, then we have to have more better education. We have to have more people become highly educated. The world is full of people who have almost no education. We cannot solve the world's problems that way. So if you want to know why I spent an entire summer, I'm a business professor, for goodness sakes, why do something and give it away? The world needs better education. And the fact that we've got people here from around the world pleases me no end. So that's one reason I wrote the book. Here's the second reason I wrote the book. I have beside my printer, I'm at my house now, beside my printer upstairs, I have an article from 2006 Fortune magazine. And it says, and the article I read back in 2006 was, what it takes to be great. I've always been fascinated by that idea of what does it take to be great? And there's a quote in that article. I'm going to read you the quote, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. And so here's the quote from the article in 2006 that has sat beside my printer for 17 years. The quote is this: in virtually every field of endeavor, most people learn quickly at first, then more slowly, and then stop developing completely. Yet a few do improve for years and even decades and go on to greatness. Most people improve and then they flatten out and they never improve again. But a few people improve, 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 and go on to greatness. So I have a question for you to get started. There's two groups of teachers. There's what I call the plateau group. They got better, and at some point, they stopped improving. That's you see it every day, is that they got to a certain level. It may have been here or here, wherever, and they stopped improving. I call that the plateau group, that they still teach, but they never get any better. But there's a few people, hopefully you and some of the people around you, who teach and get better and 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 go on for greatness. I call that the improving group. I wrote the book because I want you to be in the improving group. I don't care in your building, and we all make excuses. I don't care in your building if everybody else is in the plateau group. I want you to be in the improving group, and you can do that because the world needs better teachers. And if you're in the improving group and you start improving a little bit each year, you will, I promise you, go on to greatness. Pretty soon, you'll be the best teacher in your building, and people will start coming to you and saying, how do you do it so well? I want you to be in the improving group and not in the plateau group. And you can look around you. I go back to the people that I have known for years, and it's amazing how many in 1975 they taught at one level, and if they're still teaching today, they're still teaching at the same level. We've all got to improve, and that's why I wrote the book. So I'm going to give you 8 secrets, but if you wonder why I'm giving you these 8 secrets, it's so that you'll be in the improving group and you'll continue to improve, and you'll eventually be, if you're not already, a great teacher. Now, if you read the book, I love lists. I am just a list fanatic. And there are places in the book where I include lists. So as soon as Toby said that he'd like for me to speak, my first comment was, well, I'll make a list. So I'm going to give you 8 secrets or things I've learned in my 53 years. And just because it amuses me, we're going to do it as a countdown from the least to the best. Number 8, number 7, number 6, and go all the way to number 1. And even before I get started, one of the things that you might ask yourself is, if you were going to list 8 things you've learned in teaching, what would you list? I mean, I'm going to give you my list, but heck, I'd be interested in your sending me an email and giving me your list of the 8 things that you have learned over the years. I'm always fascinated about what people have learned about teaching. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you these 8 things, and for each one, I'll kind of explain it. And then I'm going to read a short section from the book Transformative Education. Not very, the first 2 are a little bit long, but the rest of them are fairly short. Just because I want you to hear what I thought about these as I wrote them in the book. Okay, so let's get started. Number 8, the first thing I would say is, it's very important never to forget what it's like to be a student. When I first started teaching, which was back in 1971, one of the things I promised myself was that I was always going to remember what it felt like to sit in a classroom and be lost, what it felt like to sit in a classroom and be confused. And I started teaching, and almost immediately, I forgot what it felt like to be a student. I was on the other side of the desk. I was the guy who knew what was going on. I was the person who couldn't believe these people were so confused. I lost the ability to think like a student. So one of the things I have tried to do over the years I have taught is to take as many classes as I can in stuff that I'm bad at, because I want to sit in a classroom and feel stupid. For example, I have taken for the last 5 years Tai Chi. 5 years I've done Tai Chi, but I'm awful at it. But my teacher is so incredibly kind. No matter how many times I make the same dumb mistake, he comes over and he encourages me, and he makes me feel better, and it helps me to be a better teacher. So what I would suggest to you is, if you want to be a better teacher, go out and find some class. Don't get a class that you're brilliant in. That's not the point. Find a class that you are not good at, and then you'll start remembering what it's like to be a dumb student, and that will give you more empathy. So I'm going to read a section from Transformative Education about one of my classroom experiences. So a couple of years ago, I took a class in large format photography. That's one of these things from the 1860s, which is on the tripod, and you get under a blanket and you look through the lens, and they make great pictures, but it's an extremely slow process. So I took a class, and it was a Saturday and Sunday class. And on Saturday, the teacher, who was a great teacher, showed us how to take these pictures very carefully. And then we did 2 exposures, and the teacher told us that he was going to take them home that night and develop them for us. I went out and I took a picture of a tree. Can you imagine? And I got a picture of this tree. So I went out there and I worked on it, and I really wanted to do well. So I paid real close attention, and I really felt like I had done a great job. And I came back on Sunday, and I was so proud of myself because I knew I had done a good job. And I will read a little section from Transformative Education. On Sunday morning, the teacher arrived carrying several packages of developed photos and explained to us, "We did not label these yesterday, so I will hold up each set. You can tell me which pictures are yours. We have 5 students in this class, but only 4 sets turned out. Unfortunately, something went wrong with one pair of negatives. They were completely blank." You can probably see where this is going. A panicked thought flashed through my mind. Oh, geez, I hope I'm not the one who made the mistake. I really want to do well in this class. I tried so hard. Please let someone else be the person who did it wrong. So the teacher showed us the first 2 photographs, and a student on the other side of the room claimed them. A second pair went to another student, as did a third. And like a game of musical chairs, there were 2 of us remaining, but the teacher only held a single set of photos. One student had succeeded, and the other student had failed. It was that simple. In my mind, I was practically praying, let it be the other student who messed up. I don't want the class to know that I am the dumb one. But, of course, I was the student whose photos were improperly exposed. I was the dumb student. I had inserted a plate backwards on the camera, so the light had been unable to reach the negatives. It was not a catastrophe. No one really cared. The other students barely noticed. They were looking at their own photos. We were merely taking a weekend class on photography. Nevertheless, despite my best efforts, I was the bottom of the class. Everyone there knew I was the only person in the room who failed to do the process correctly. The next day, I went back to the University of Richmond and resumed my normal role as a tenured professor. But for the next few weeks, I had considerably more patience for the students in my class who were struggling and occasionally needed to hear an explanation a second time. If you're always the teacher, the wise and brilliant expert in the room, the perspective of the student can be lost. That's not good for you or your teaching. So my question would be, if you're in my class and I like to call on people, I would call on you and say, okay, when's the last time you took a class where you were not brilliant, where you were the dumb one? And my guess is that it's probably for some of you been a long time before you did that. So here's my suggestion for number 8. Sometime in the next month or 2, find a school somewhere, take a class in something you want to learn, but something you don't know well. Sit in the room and get the feeling of how it feels to be lost and confused. You'll go back to your classroom, and I'll bet you'll be a better teacher. That's hint or secret number 8. Number 7, I'm assuming all of you work at some university or college or school or something. Find the best teacher in your building other than you and figure out from that person how the magic works. I guarantee you there are people in your university or your college or your school who are excellent teachers. They may not teach like you, but they're excellent teachers. Pick their brain. So go to them, and there are several ways to do this, but go to them and say, I'd like to buy your lunch, or I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee, and I'd like to talk with you about teaching. I suspect that you know a lot about teaching, And I'd like to learn some of that. I'd like to learn how that magic works. You've probably read Ken Bain's book on what the best college teachers do. And he makes the plea very early in the book that most people don't learn from other teachers, that they just don't do it. So one of my suggestions would be, this would be number 7, is find some way to learn from your colleagues. Great artists are always said to say, they basically steal from each other. Well, I think great teachers should do the same thing. Who in your building really does it well? Go to that person and say, I've got a very particular problem, and I'd like to see how you would address that problem. If you simply walk into a great teacher and go, tell me how to be a great teacher, you're going to get nonsense because it's just too vague. But if you go in and say, I cannot get my students to be prepared for class. How do you do that? I'll buy you a cup of coffee. Let's talk about it. Those conversations can just be fantastic. Make it a point to learn from others. So I want to read you again a comment from Transformative Education. This is my favorite story in the whole book, I will tell you. And if you're not an art fan, Mark Rothko was a well-known American painter, artist in the 1950s. And he was so interesting that they created a play about his life called Red. And I saw Red here in Richmond, 20 years ago. And I sat through the whole play, and I liked the play. But there was one part of that play that just mesmerized me. It was amazing. 95% of the play was interesting. 5% of that play I have thought about virtually every day since that time. So let me start with this. So in the play, Mark Rothko tells a story. He's talking to his assistant. He tells this story, and he tells us, the assistant, that he had gone to the Museum of Modern Arts in New York City, and he had seen a painting by Henri Matisse called The Red Studio. And he realized it was a work of a genius, but he didn't understand why. It was like me knowing that another teacher is a great teacher, but I don't understand how or why. So here's what he says. At first, the painting's stunning effect baffled Rothko. Unlike most people, Rothko could not let go of the need to understand what he was seeing and feeling. How was Matisse, how was that other teacher, able to produce such a powerful visual effect? What caused this particular mix of oil paints to be so mesmerizing? Rothko apparently returned to the museum every day to stand in front of this one painting for hours, mentally analyzing Matisse's techniques and talent. Can you imagine? He stood in front of this one painting every day for hours, trying to see why it was so good. He knew he was looking at a work of genius, but at first he could not discern what elevated it to that extraordinary level. The daily pilgrimage continued until Rothko slowly unraveled the mystery to his satisfaction. He had a tenacious need to comprehend the effect, a personality characteristic that enabled him to grow artistically as he deciphered the secrets that made this painting such a brilliant work. And here's the part I really like. Rothko did not stare at the Matisse painting for 5 minutes and then mutter, wow, that was great, and turned and walked off. Rothko did not buy a book about Matisse and fall in line with the opinions of an unknown expert. Rothko did not take a class on Matisse so the teacher could explain various theories about the artist and his work. Rothko did not search the internet, this is what everybody does, to learn about Matisse and the meaning of that piece of work. No, Rothko stood there and studied the Red Studio obsessively, hour after hour, mentally figuring out for himself the wonder of its composition. The work inspired him so completely that he was unable to move forward until he grasped its essence. So the question then I have is easy. If there's somebody on your floor who's a great teacher, do you spend any time trying to figure out how that person does it? Or do you just accept, oh, he's a great teacher? He was born with the DNA. Nobody has teaching DNA. You have to learn how to be a great teacher. And so my second piece of advice, number 7, is going to be learn from those people around you who are great. Make it a point to go and talk with them, because you can learn more by talking to them than you can in any other way. Pay attention. Be like Rothko. Look at that painting and go, if I look at this carefully enough, I will understand it. I may not paint like this, but I will understand it. That's number 7. Number 6, I can tell you what the problem is with most students. This is not a secret. They have Swiss cheese knowledge. I have said that for 53 years. Students have Swiss cheese knowledge, and they don't even understand that they have it. Well, what you should say then is, what the heck is Swiss cheese knowledge? Swiss cheese knowledge is the students walk out of class and they think they know. They've heard your discussion, they've taken notes, they believe they know what is important, and they go their merry way and they'll think about it. Most students, I would say every student, walks out of class with something that looks like solid knowledge, but it's just full of holes. For those of you who teach accounting, this is especially important. I can talk about lease accounting, and my students think they understand lease accounting, but they don't, because their knowledge is full of holes. So how do you address Swiss cheese knowledge? Well, the way I address Swiss cheese knowledge is, as soon as class is over, I will send them one additional question. But the question is 10% harder than what we covered in class. So whether you're teaching science or psychology or political science, but what you're doing is you're addressing where you believe those holes are in their knowledge. And I give them a time limit. Students do better if you say, this will take you 15 minutes. If you just say, do the problem, they think it's going to take 10 hours. So I always say, take 15 minutes. And then I give them the answer. The answer is $78,000. The answer is Napoleon. The answer is, I don't know. But tell them, if you don't get the answer in 15 minutes, wander into my office and I'll give you a hint. And of course, what you've done is you've asked a question that addresses the holes in their knowledge. So it's not uncommon in my classes for students to walk in and go, I knew the material, but you sent that darn question and you said the answer was $79,000 and I can't get $79,000. I thought I knew the material. Well, I look at them and go, well, you did know the material, but your knowledge had a hole in it. And that question addressed the hole. And so now if you can figure out, we'll work on it, how to get to that 79,000, then you'll know the material, because the hole will be filled in. So in whatever you teach, you have to understand that the most important time for reinforcing what they're learning is immediately after class. Because if you don't do it immediately after class, they're going to go worry about something else. So if you're teaching, earnings per share, and you wonder if they can make the computation of diluted earnings per share, then send them a problem and say, oh, the answer is $4.16. But if you can't get that, come see me. And that will start filling those holes in. That's number 6. And that is what you want to make sure of, is to address Swiss cheese knowledge. And I would guarantee you, I don't teach anything besides accounting. The students in every discipline have that problem. Here's number 5. You want to be a great teacher? I can tell you how to be a great teacher. If you want to be a great teacher, you have to have a way to communicate with the students. How do you communicate with your students? They cannot read your mind. Guarantee that. They cannot read your mind in this case. So you have to be able to communicate with them in some fashion. In my classes, and if you've been in my classes before, you'll know this already, I use email, and I use it obsessively. I will email my students on the average every single day, 7 times a week at least, because there's always something I need to communicate to them to help them become better learners. Now, I use email because I like email. I have to teach my students to read those emails. And so I always say, if it's on an email, it's subject to being tested. So if I put someone on email, just realize that I will test you on it if necessary, because I want them to read the emails. You find a way to communicate that works best for you. But keep in mind, they cannot read your mind. It may be as clear as glass to you. They cannot read your mind. You need some way to communicate to them. So I'll read you a little story here that I have from the book. And I'll tell you a background behind this story. About 15 years ago, St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia invited me to speak. And so I wanted to do something different. So I walked in and said, I'm going to teach you to be a better teacher in a way that you've never learned before. And I started out by saying, assume that you've been offered a lot of money by some rich people to teach their dog Fido to roll over. And what I want you to do is to get in groups of 2 and tell me a couple of things you're going to do to teach Fido to roll over. And immediately, they thought I was going to talk about accounting. I'm talking about having a dog roll over, but they were amused. Then I had them call out what they would suggest, and I wrote them on the board. And we came up with a list, I think it was 9 or 10 things, but they were perfect education ideas. Reinforce Fido, whatever Fido does, that type of thing. So at the end, I had them remove the word Fido and put in your students. And I had them remove the word roll over and put in do business or do accounting or do philosophy or whatever they were teaching. And it was amazing. What you learn in teaching Fido to roll over really helps you to understand how to teach your students whatever your subject matter is. So the story I'm going to read you, which is a short story, is about teaching Fido to roll over. All communications must be clear. The teacher must communicate exactly what Fido is supposed to do. Fido cannot read your mind. If the communication is not clear, the poor dog cannot even raise his paw and ask for clarification. Demonstrate the desired outcome as precisely as possible. Good communications are vital. Get that right, and successful learning is much easier. Get that wrong, and you and Fido are probably both out of luck. How do you communicate to your students? Do they have to read your mind? And if they have to read your mind, how good are they at that? That's number 5. Find a good way to communicate and teach your students that that's how you're going to communicate to them. I use email, but I train my students to read those emails. Here's number 4. In some ways, this is the most important. I can make anybody a better teacher. This is it. Number 4 is the way to become a better teacher. And it's so simple, so easy. If you want to be a great teacher, you've got to get your students to prepare before they come to class. Simple as that. If your students walk in and they're well prepared, then every class will be magical. If they're prepared, they'll talk, they'll answer, they'll debate, they'll discuss. They'll be great. I don't care if they're smart or not smart. If they're prepared, they will blow your socks off. They'll be just great in class. But if they're not prepared, they'll sit there and take notes. And that's all you can do, is to sit there and watch them take notes. And that's so sad, because that forces you to become a lecturer. And you may want to be a lecturer, but almost everybody will tell you that engaging the students is going to be a better process. How do you get 100% of your students to walk in ready to go, prepared? Now, here's how I do it. I'm big, if you read Transformative Education, I'm big on puzzles, or puzzling questions, you might say. So I always give my students 3 or 4 or 5 questions in advance, puzzles. And I say, when you walk in on Friday, I'm going to ask you to do these. One of my favorite comments in class is, I'm paid enough to ask you questions. I'm not paid enough to give you answers. Boy, the students hate that. But it's true. I want them to figure out the answers. What good does it do for me to figure out the answers? I already know the answers. So I'll give them these puzzles and they'll walk in. And as soon as they walk in, we start unraveling the puzzles. And I'll say, Mr. Jones, Miss Smith, tell me what we're doing here. And what's the puzzle we're having to figure out? Go around the room and start asking people, what would you do in this case? How would you address this? Now, the first week I do that, the students look at me like I have three heads. But after I do that for a week and they see I'm serious and they start getting interested in the puzzles and they start realizing that they are indeed smart enough to answer those puzzles, then they start getting into it. And pretty soon they're coming in prepared. And pretty soon those conversations get a whole lot better. So I don't know how you prepare, but that's one that I really hope you'll think about deeply. If you simply say, read chapter 6 and we'll talk about it, they'll not read chapter 6. There's nobody in the world that's going to read chapter 6 if you simply tell them that. You have to give them a reason to prepare. Give them questions, give them puzzles, make them answer, and realize the first time you do it, it won't work. But they'll get used to it. They'll find out how much fun it is. If you were a student, would you rather sit there and take notes or would you rather solve the puzzle? And it only makes sense that they'd rather solve the puzzle, but you've got to work on that. And, if you lived in Richmond, I'd invite you to come to my class. Not that you want to teach that way, but just to see how it can be done. That's number 4. Number three is this. You've got to have goals. You've got to know what you want in your class. If this was a live program we were doing here today, in other words, you were in the room, I would make you take out a piece of paper and write down your goals. If you were going to come to my office, I'd make you tell me your goals. Not vague things like better learning. That's nonsense. We all want better learning. What is your goal? So I'm going to tell you 2 of my goals. I have a goal that I think about all the time, and that is, what do I want the last day of class to look like? I don't care about the first day of class. We're just trying to get someplace. So on the last day of class, I want to walk in with 100% of my students well prepared. I want to walk in and I want to ask some vague question, and then they start having the conversation and they start having the debate and they start figuring out the topic and they start working toward the information. They're well prepared, they're engaged, they're ready to get it done. So every decision I make during the semester is to get to that goal. So on the last day, when I walk in and I say, let's talk about question number 3, they've all read question 3. They've all thought about question 3. They all want to talk about question 3. That's my goal. But it works for me because that's my goal. What is your goal? Every goal should be different. What is your goal for class? So I always have that last day of the semester goal. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. The other goal I have is, what do I want for my students? This seems weird, doesn't it? You'd think the goal I would have is learn the material, but that's not really true. So I'm going to read you a little section from Transformative Education, and this is from a letter that I write to my students. Remember, I use email a lot, about the goal. So here's my goal for my students, and I'm writing specifically to the students. When you finish this course, I want you to be tremendously proud of what you have accomplished. That is my primary goal for every student. Nothing could please me more. Forget your grade. I do not care whether you earn an A+ or something less than an A+. I want you to work hard and feel proud of what you learn. As an example, this past semester, I was extraordinarily proud of a student who made neither an A nor a B. The student had some troubles, but he overcame those troubles and he made a C. But you've never seen anybody work so hard and be so proud of that C. He just made my heart sing. Never fall into the trap of thinking that grades are the goal. I hope you feel so proud of what you learned that it gives you a huge surge of confidence in your ability to go out and be a more successful learner in other classes and in life in general. If you achieve that level of pride and self-worth, then this class will be transformational in a wonderful way. So I have goals, and I know what they are. The goal for the class is that last day, I want them to be prepared, engaged, and ready to go. The goal for the students is I want them to be proud of themselves. Because if they're proud of themselves, I mean, everybody can learn accounting eventually, but being proud of yourself is a whole different level of a goal. And it's not easy to do that. I work awfully hard to try to get them to a point where they're proud of what they've accomplished in my class. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Number two, that was number three. Number two, we're down almost to the end. Number two is this: improvement comes slowly. Improvement is a slow evolutionary process. If you want to be better, and I've told this for years, if you want to be better, today is November the 30th. Make it your goal by November 30th of 2024 that you're 5% better. Now, I don't know how to measure 5%. I don't know what that means. I just mean that you're better. I don't care if you're the worst teacher in your building or the best teacher in your building. I don't care if you're the best teacher in the country. You should be 5% better by this time next year. I always try to be 5% better. How do you get to be 5% better? Well, you change something. You experiment. You try something new. You try something different. You take a risk. You gamble. You try to do something that you haven't done before. I've taught for 53 years. I try to do 3 or 4 or 5 things every semester that I've never done before just to see if they work. But I always know that they're not going to make me a much better teacher. They're going to make me a little better teacher. And then I'm going to add something else that's going to make me a little better teacher. So one of the things I would suggest to Toby is, this is November 30th. Invite all these people back November 30th of 2024 and have each of them talk about the change they've made over the past 12 months and whether it made an improvement or not. Get together. This is a community. I think the Accounting Cafe as a community is just a wonderful way to have a conversation. Get together. Tell us the changes you made in this past year. And then get 5% better the next year and 5% better the next year. And just think how wonderful your teaching would become if you make that improvement. But you've got to make that change. You've got to experiment. Do something different. And finally, number one, I'll throw it back over to Toby then. Number one, what would I say would be the most important thing I could tell you? Well, I've already alluded to this. I think you have to go into this with the belief or with the understanding that your job is so very important. I would argue that you have the most important job in the world. You change people's lives every day. I have roughly 40 or 45 students this semester. I affect their lives every day, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. Hopefully, over the course of a semester, it nets out to be a benefit. But it all hinges on a realization that you're affecting these people. These are real human beings. And I have people all the time who say, oh, I just teach in college, like, I just dig ditches or something. You ought to go out and tell everybody, I'm changing the world, one person at a time. It's not easy, but I'm out here making better people. If you talk to people and say, what kind of job do you want? They'll always say, I want to help people. Well, good for them. You already do that. You're already that teacher who's helping those people. So when you go into class, I go in tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I'm giving them a test at 10 o'clock. So they'll be pleased to death to see me. When you go into class, take a moment and look at each of those people and recognize that you're changing their lives. It's not just a game. You're changing their lives. So I want to leave you with one final quote from Transformative Education. And this is a quote that always kind of breaks my heart in some ways, especially the last sentence. Where will the medical, scientific, artistic, and so many other discoveries come from during the next few decades if today's faculty, me and you, administrators and staff do less than an outstanding job of guiding college students? Who will create society-changing breakthroughs in the coming decades if we are unable to engage students in the wonders of our topic? And then here's the sentence that always makes me, sad. Would a cure for cancer or a more reliable source of renewable energy exist today if colleges had done a better job 30 years ago. We can change the world. You and I can change the world. Toby, I can tell more stories. Trust me, Toby, I'm just starting. If you want more stories, I can tell more stories.
Joe, that was truly wonderful and hugely inspiring. I know you say that you want us to be the best teachers we can be, but I have to say, I wish I could be a teacher more like you. Never mind me. I wish I was a teacher less like me and more like you. Yeah, truly inspiring. And I've got so much to think about, and I'm going to take it up on your advice. But thank you so much for that, Joe. Listen, we're coming right up to the hour. I know people have got teaching commitments and other places to go. So please do feel free to jump off the call. If you sign up to the Accounting Cafe newsletter, I will send out a recording and a link to the recording, and you'll be able to see the whole thing and the following discussion that those of us who are remaining will have.